very much. Keep up the good work and making some good progress on the local. Scud? SKUD? Yes, from No More Fukushimas, the local group. Okay, thank you. And next, we're going to bring Doug Bogen to the table. He's from the Seacoast Anti-Pollution League, one of the New Hampshire groups that's working very hard also on the relicensing issue.
Thank you, Christine. For those of you who aren't in the local area or follow the long, sordid history of Seabrook, Seacoast Anti-Pollution League, which I'm the director, has been around since before Seabrook. We actually got started back in 1969, you know, when Seabrook was really just a gleam in the eye of Governor Melvin Thompson, and been working ever since. We were involved in the intervention and the original licensing, worked to get them to build a better cooling system to put the pipes out into the ocean rather than destroying the salt marsh. We worked to kill off the second reactors. You may know they were originally, I heard originally they were going to have 4 reactors, I guess, just like Fukushima, you know, but they eventually started to build 2 and of course only finished 1 of them. And the second one is just a hole in the ground at this point. I was glad to see a few years ago there was I saw that they put a geodesic dome over it to protect the hole in the ground, because evidently groundwater is leaking out of there. So I found that interesting. But we've been involved from day one. We continue as a watchdog group. As I say, we've been involved in most of the battles, especially in the legal end of Seabrook all these years. And we continue in that role. We're based in Exeter, New Hampshire. And most recently been involved in the legal intervention and the relicensing, as Bruce brought up earlier. I'll say a little bit more about that later. But I wanted to give a little bit more retrospective on the history of Seabrook, really since it started running, not all the prior, because that is a long history. But it's interesting to note how many things have not worked according to plan out there and up to the current day. Really from the get-go, they started having troubles with their emergency diesel generators. These are the, as we know from Fukushima, these are the generators that are supposed to kick in when the regular power goes out. This has been a chronic problem at Seabrook. It's that way at probably most of the plants in the country. But it's interesting that, you know, in their first decade, they had numerous problems with it. They've been cited numerous times by the NRC. My favorite story is that these generators will, when they kick in, if they do start up, they have to be kept cooled, and they sometimes overheat. And one of the stories I heard a while back was that the room that these generators were put in didn't have proper ventilation, was not air conditioned properly for some reason, so they would just open a window, you know, ventilate. Real high-tech solution there. Most notably back in 2001, actually very similar, it was almost exactly, however many years, 11 years back from now, we had a big storm just like we just had now. You know, in that case it was, I think, a couple feet of snow. Well, that knocked out all 3 of the off-site power sources to the Seabrook plant. They have, you know, backups and backups, and they had 3 different power lines. But because this was such a heavy storm, not the storm of the century, but a significant nor'easter, all 3 of those power sources went out. Fortunately, the diesel generators did kick in, and they did do their job. But it is disconcerting to us that live in the area that we don't really know how good these are. Now, the NRC sensed that. The NRC has now said that, and the plant owners say, well, we've replaced that diesel generator. We've got a brand new one that works much better than the old ones. And so we're supposed to be assured from that. But that's just one issue that's been an ongoing problem. Another one is the leakage of radioactive tritium. So you know, tritium is radioactive hydrogen, gets incorporated into the water. It's basically radioactive water. And like water, it's odorless, tasteless, smells, looks just like water. And it gets into the environment just like water. It gets into our bodies, flows through our bodies just like water. And as we've seen, I think it's 2/3 of all the nuclear plants in the country have had problems, chronic problems with leaking tritium getting into the groundwater. into the surface waters. We've seen it at Vermont Yankee, most notably in this area. But at Seabrook, they started leaking tritium before the plant was even 10 years old. It was back in 1999 they first started leaking tritium. And they said, oh, well, don't worry, we'll pump out the groundwater. We'll control it so it doesn't spread further. And unlike the Vermont Yankee on the Connecticut River, the Seabrook plant evidently hasn't been leaking into Seabrook Harbor, although I question the detection limits that they set on the, evidently it's hard to detect tritium in seawater, so their detection limits are pretty high, which means we don't really know. There could be some, they just can't measure it. But this is an ongoing problem. They're continuing to pump the groundwater. In recent years, they've been pumping over 30,000 gallons of water per day to kind of pull on that aquifer, pull on the groundwater so it's not extending out from the plant and bringing it up to the surface at the plant. Now, of course, you got to put that water somewhere. That's like a large swimming pool full of water every day. 30, yeah, I think it's 34,000 gallons. And what they do is they send it out in those cooling pipes that go out into the ocean. So they're just dumping it into the ocean. Now, as you know, with most things in our society, certainly the NRC follows what the EPA has always followed, that dilution is the solution to pollution. And sure enough, they think it's perfectly fine to dump it out in the ocean. Now, you can say, well, yes, it does get diluted, and it is water, so it's just a little bit of tritiated water. And, but we're talking about a huge amount of radiation going out into the ocean, getting dispersed into the environment. Certainly not on the level that we're seeing at Fukushima, but certainly troublesome for us folks that don't think there should be any additional radiation in our local environment. So that's one other ongoing problem. It also brings up the point, again, as Bruce described, you know, this plant is on the ocean, on the water table. It's very high, and they have problems with groundwater. I won't go into more detail on the issue with the crumbling concrete, but the fact is they've known about this leaking groundwater. They've known there's been water in those foundations for many, many years. I mean, you know, I saw a email message from one of the NRC spokespeople several years ago, before we'd heard anything about the concrete, saying, yeah, we know there's water in those tunnels, and you know, they're pumping it out, so don't worry. You know, they're going to put in some extra sump pumps and take care of it. But you got to think, well, where did they think the water was coming from? How was it getting into the basement? You know, this isn't your house, which, you know, we all have leaky basements. We're talking about a multi-billion-dollar facility that's not supposed to leak. You know, that's what it's about. And evidently it's happening all over, not just in that one tunnel, but throughout the foundations. And we're seeing that with the tritium leakage, as well as with the, and by the way, that same water that I just looked it up today, it was that tunnel, whatever B, that's where they also found tritium at significant levels as well. So it's a problem throughout that area. Now that seems bad enough as it is. I mean, it's not like you can just jack up the foundation and put in a new liner or whatever, you know. You could maybe do that with your house, but we're talking again about a huge facility here, billions of dollars likely involved. We need to think about the future. I mean, that's what we're talking about. That's really the issue here, is where's that plant going to be 10 years, 20 years, 30, 40 years from now? I don't think Bruce mentioned it, but the relicensing, most of you probably know this, but they are relicensing this plant fully 20 years ahead of its end of existing license. You know, unlike the Vermont Yankee plant, which license runs out, what, next week or a couple of weeks from now? Yeah, right, right. And they evidently didn't, I mean, they obviously spent many years haggling over it, but they didn't do it 20 years ahead. But it is a trend in the nuclear industry to try to get it done early. You know, why wait till the last minute? I guess they figure they might run into some trouble if they waited till 2025, you know. So they're doing it now. They announced this almost 2 years ago now, 2010, and they wanted to get it done. I'm sure they are not happy about having interveners. You know, as I mentioned, SAPL is one of the interveners. and several other organizations, Paul Gunter's group, we'll talk about it more, are involved at from the national level. And you know, we're trying to put a monkey wrench into the works, if you will, in terms of that process, because the NRC just wants to get this done, you know, really just rubber stamp. And as you may know, they have rubber stamped 60 plants throughout the country. Pretty much everyone that's, and really everyone that has applied for a relicense has gotten it, even though how they can project 20 years into the future or more, just beyond really human imagining. I don't know what makes them so arrogant that they think they can predict how this plant's going to operate. So I wanted to just present a little bit of this issue of looking into the future and you know, how they seem to be operating. And I want to use as an example some references in the environmental impact statement, because this is one of the key public documents that we have. They held a hearing on it last fall. Looks like this. It's a lot bigger. It's like 350 pages, but didn't want to bring the whole thing with me. But in this document, they make various odd references to current need. You know, there's a quote from a ways into the report, assuming that a need currently exists for the power generated from the Seabrook reactor. Well, okay, we know it's running now, or has been in recent years, but we're not talking about current need, we're talking about need 20 years down the road or more. You know, that's the issue, it's not what's current. Again, they make references to, well, you know, we know what the radiation exposure is now, the routine emissions that they have, the tritium levels, etc. And here's another quote. They say, the radiological impacts from the current operation at Seabrook are not expected to change significantly. Well, that's nice. They think it's not expected to. They never expect these things. I'm sure the folks in Japan didn't expect to have a 9.0 earthquake. You know, this is kind of the attitude that they continually present. I mean, it's good to be confident in your work, but the idea that they can expect what's going to happen 10, 20, 30 years down the road is just amazing. One last quote I'll mention is, this is actually from the executive summary of the environmental impact statement. They refer to, the NRC initially considered a number of additional alternatives. Now, you know, part of the basic process of an environmental impact statement is you're supposed to look at alternatives. That's why this whole process exists, is that, you know, we at least pretend to be a rational society, a rational governmental process, and they need to look at the different alternatives and give some kind of objective analysis of which one makes the most sense. So they say, well, yeah, we looked at these other alternatives, and you know, two license renewals Seabrook. These were later dismissed due to technical resource availability or commercial limitations that currently exist, and that the NRC staff believes are likely to continue to exist when the existing Seabrook license expires. So they've got all this figured out. They know what, you know, the economy and, you know, alternative energy resources 10, 20, again 30 years down the road are going to be like. And it ain't going to work, you know, we've got it figured out. I mean, it's quite amazing, the arrogance that's in that statement, to say we know the future, we know where future energy sources are going to be, and we've got to have Seabrook, because if we don't, you know, all hell will break loose, we'll all be freezing in the dark. So, you know, just to give you some idea of where they're coming from, and of course our contention, literally, what we're contending in this intervention is that maybe they don't know the future, maybe there is an alternate future, maybe we have a better idea, maybe collectively we can come up with a better vision of where we need to be going with our power in this area, nationally, globally, but certainly right here on the seacoast of New Hampshire. So that's the basis of our contention, really, is what our future power sources likely to look like. And part of that idea is what is the environment to this plant going to look like. You know, the environmental impact statement is supposed to look at the environment, you know, that's why they've got environment in the name. And the odd thing is they always look at, well, what's the impact of the plant on the environment? But they never seem to consider what's the impact of the environment on the plant. Now, again, if you think the future is going to be just like the past and today, it doesn't matter. We know what it's currently. You know, we know that the ocean is doing this, and the groundwater is doing that, and the winds come in, and storms happen, and so forth. But the world is changing. You know, they're not anti-science. They certainly read the reports. They're not, you know, deniers of global warming, but they seem to operate as if it isn't going to happen. Sea level's not going to rise. Storms aren't going to get greater. The shoreline will never change. That nice salt marsh out there will always be there. But that is not what current science is projecting. You know, there have been numerous studies, some just in the last few years. You've probably all seen the images of Greenland ice cap melting, Antarctica, so forth. The current projections by the most reputable scientists are that we could see a 5 to 6 foot sea level rise within the next 100 years, and maybe 2 to 3 feet within the next 50 years. Now, you'd think that might enter into their decision making because they're talking about 50 years from now. When you talk about the waste, because the waste isn't going to get hauled out the day they shut down the plant, we all know that, we're talking 70, 80 years into the future. So yes, it does matter where sea level's going to be. And I brought just one little show and tell item. This was a map that was put together by a group called Clean Air, Cool Planet. I'm sorry it's not really big, but you can come up and look at it later, see where maybe you live in relation to it. But this is Seabrook, Hampton Harbor. And this is looking 100 years down the road with a 3 foot, 1 meter sea level rise, and what the impact will be on the coastal marshes, the waterfront, the beaches, etc. I'm sorry to say Hampton Beach just ain't going to be there according to this projection. Now when the beach is gone, that means the ocean is going inland. You know, it's going to be rolling right up on Seabrook. On this map, Seabrook is right here where this yellow label is, and the reactor dome itself is right under the W in power on this map. Now you'll notice that the blue here, this is where the ocean's going to be in 2100 with just a 3 foot sea level rise, let alone 5 or 6 feet. And as you'll notice, Seabrook is offshore. Seabrook is no longer on the land. It's going to be inundated with seawater. So the problems they're having now with groundwater, with the foundations leaking, etc., do you think they're going to be the same 50 years from now as they are today? I mean, does anybody want to bet on that not being totally flooded or having much, much worse problems? It's just absurd that they could suggest, oh, it'll be similar to what it is now. We'll just get a few more pumps, you know, we'll just build a dike around the thing. I don't know. I have no idea what they're thinking. Now, what they'll tell you, go and ask them, well, what are you going to do about sea level rise? Oh, don't worry. The critical structures in the plant, you know, like the reactor, the safety systems, they're 20 feet above sea level. You go, oh, that's nice. That sounds good, doesn't it? Now, that doesn't mean the whole plant is. It's just the critical structures, whatever they may be. It turns out, though, that, you know, 3 or 5 foot sea level rise actually translates to more like 12 feet, 15 feet, as much as 18 feet of storm surge. When you get a 100-year storm or a 500-year storm, which we've seen a few of in recent years, you could see much worse damage, much worse inundation. So even those 20 foot above sea level systems are not necessarily safe. And as we've seen with the Fort Calhoun reactor out in Nebraska, right, on the Missouri River, you know, it's not good when your plant is flooded or surrounded by water, whether it's river water or seawater. We don't want to go there. So it is amazing to me that they continue to operate like, not a problem, we'll take care of it, you know, we'll deal with that when we get there. And I go, no, if you're going to relicense this 20 years ahead, you've got to be thinking 20 years ahead, or really 40, 50 years ahead. And we need to be thinking about what the options are. And as I mentioned, I'll stop fairly soon, but I just want to mention briefly that part of our contention, of course, is that we do have viable alternatives, and there's a number of them, as you all know. The key thing is using less energy, using it more efficiently, bringing in these renewable technologies, solar energy, wind power, and other related renewable, sustainable technologies. But beyond the obvious ones of using less energy and using it more efficiently, The key one for this area that really seems to have huge potential is offshore wind power. There's just, if you've ever seen or been to Europe, they're just doing incredible things with that. Almost every other country besides the US is doing offshore wind in a big way. They're getting thousands of megawatts of power. I believe it's up to 3,000 megawatts, something like that. You know, every year it almost doubles. I mean, it's quite dramatic how quickly they're doing this. Yeah.
I was going to say Ireland, they're like a third of their power or more.
Yeah,
Maybe 40%.
Denmark has done incredible things. You know, there's whole communities, islands that have been run completely on wind power. And the amazing thing is they figured out if you link these different wind farms together, it doesn't matter whether the wind's blowing here or there, it's always blowing somewhere. You know, that's the nature of the planet. And you can link them up, and sure enough, there's a whole program, a $5 billion consortium of groups led by Google that's planning to connect up all these wind farms up and down the East Coast. And again, that's being done in Europe as we speak. So all these things are happening, but the NRC and the plant owners, ironically, NextEra just happens, the folks that own Seabrook now, they just happen to be the single largest developer of onshore, you know, up in the hills, wind power in the country, which is kind of ironic, but they don't see any future in offshore. I mean, I guess that's their own little blinders there, but you'd think they'd want to get in on that. I mean, if they have any sense, but hey, that might compete with the nuke plants, which they also own several of. So this is what we're dealing with, and we think that we have a winning argument. You know, again, if they were being rational, there's an outfit that's planning to build one of these, a full-scale demonstration model, 5 megawatts and 1 turbine just off the coast of Cape Nettic, if you know southern Maine. Boone Island is one of the demonstration areas that they're looking to start this within the next few years. I mean, this is happening. They've already built one out in Portugal. You know, again, Europe's way ahead of us, but they're planning to bring it here. This group is actually based in Seattle, but they've set up an office in Camden, Maine, not too far from Rockland, I guess. And we hope to see this get built. It's pretty exciting stuff. I'll just mention, if you want to learn, if you're in the area next week and want to learn more about all this whole picture of offshore wind, I'm going to be giving a presentation Thursday evening, this Thursday, March 8th, in Portsmouth. I can tell you more about it if you're in the area and want to know exactly when and where that is. But we think it's pretty exciting stuff, and it's really a much more viable future, obviously, than more nukes. And we hope that we can convey that, obviously, to the public, but to the folks in power down in Washington. And hopefully that's setting up Paul to talk a little bit more about the broader picture here. But of course, SAPL does appreciate your support if you are in the local area. Even if you aren't, we have members in many states around the country. We do have a yellow flyer over there that has more information about us and how to get in touch with us. So again, thank you very much for